Hi, I'm Phil. Welcome to SMP. When it comes to SAT and ACT test prep, I know there's a lot of resources out there to help you prepare, and I'm glad you found this channel. I believe I offer something unique.
If you want to learn more about the channel, the type of content I provide, and my qualifications, please click this link above. Let's begin this 2026 math practice test for the SAT, Module 1. You'll notice these first few questions on the SAT are actually surprisingly simple. You want to actually do these with confidence, move through them quickly, and don't overthink it. Question number 1. A lot of these graph descriptions, you actually don't even really need to take the time to read it. Just go ahead and jump to the question, see what they're asking for. It says, at a depth of negative 140 feet, what is the temperature as predicted by the line? The only trick here is to find where negative 140 feet is. You can see right there in between 120 and 160. So we're going to go up and we see that the line is at 45. So our answer is C. And we move right on. Question 2. If rectangle B has an area of 30 square inches and is removed from rectangle C, which has an area of 87 inches, what is the area of the remaining figure? I drew a little diagram so you can kind of visualize it there. We're just going to take 30 out of 87 and you get 57. That's it. Moving on to number 3. Negative 47 plus the absolute value of x equals negative 42. To solve for x there, I'm just going to add 47 to both sides. And we're going to be left with the absolute value of x equals 5. X could actually be 5 or negative 5 in this instance. So just keep in mind the rules of absolute value. For this question, it's C. Moving on. Number 4, Andre went to the market and purchased a loaf of bread and some lunch meat. If the bread cost $4 and the lunch meat was $9.90 per pound, which equation would help you find how many pounds of meat he bought if he spent a total of $18.85? We're not actually solving anything here, just writing an equation. As we look at these equations, we can see that you're either timesing p by 4 or 990. We can tell from the description that the p needs to be next to 990 per pound. So it has to be C or D. So then the question is, are we adding 990p or subtracting 990p? We're definitely adding that to the cost, so our answer has to be C. Number 5, got another graph here. The graph looks like there's number of shifts in the y-axis and total value of tips in dollars for the x. The problem reads, the bar graph above shows a delivery driver's tips in dollars received each shift over the course of 19 days. For how many shifts did the driver earn a wage of 25? We'll find the 25 there, and it looks like it lines up with 4, so our answer is A. On an xy plane, a line is graphed with a slope of negative 4 and passes through the point 0, 7, which is the y-intercept. The equation y equals vx plus n represents the line where v and n are constants. What is the value of v? You're going to need to know the y equals mx plus b equation here, very well-known algebra equation. And in this case, we can see that v is in place of where the m usually is. So they're looking for the slope. So we can simply say v equals negative 4, and we're done. Move on. Number 7 says, what is an x-intercept for the graph of that expression on the xy plane? You have a couple options. You could simply go to Desmos and graph this, and you could look and see any of these 3 points would work, and you could just write down one of those coordinates and be done. 3, 0, and you're done. uh, when they're asking for an actual x-intercept, we don't want to necessarily just write x equals 3. We want to write the intercept itself. So we could write that. We could also notice those intercepts are the opposites of each of those factors. So negative 2 would be one of the options. Okay. You could also write negative 10 as one of the options. Those would all be uh, x-intercepts. Okay, moving on to 8. Triangles RST and DEF are congruent, and the vertices correspond to the order given. The measure of the angle S is 40 degrees, and the measure of the angle T is 25. What is the measure of angle E? I've already drawn these for you. Obviously, they usually would not be there. They told us that S was 40 degrees, okay? And you'll notice here that E is actually in the exact same position as S. Might be helpful for you to draw that picture on your own when you do the test, or maybe you can simply look at the ordering here and notice that S and E are in the same spot, and therefore E is also 40 degrees. Number 9 says Julia purchased some cryptocurrency. The graph below shows the approximate value of her crypto in dollars as a function of the number of weeks that have been passed since her purchase. What information does the y-intercept, so that's what we're looking at specifically there, communicate in this situation? So we'll notice the y-intercept here is 300. So what does that communicate? Well, we'll notice we have weeks down here. And so at 0 weeks, that is the intercept. So this would be how much Julia is starting with. So we're going to look at our options here. You could read through those and you just notice that C says the estimated value of the currency at the time of purchase was $300. So C is the clear answer there since none of the other options give that explanation. And number 10, for the function f of x equals 1/4 x plus 8, what is the value of f of 12? Okay, what they're saying here is that basically x equals 12. So we could just plug that in and say 1/4 of 12 plus 8. Okay, 12 plus 8 is 20. What is 1/4 of 20? You could punch that in a calculator, or maybe that's something you can do in your head, but 1/4 times 20 is 5. So f of 12 equals 5. So there you go. C. Number 11 says the graph below shows a system of equations. One line represents a linear function and the other is an absolute value function. What is the solution to this system? I've already marked a solution to a system for linear equations or absolute values is just wherever they meet. So you'll notice these two lines cross at 3.5 for x, or 7/2, and negative 1/2 for y. So there you go, D. Number 12. A system of equations has infinitely many solutions. If one equation is y equals 2x plus 5, which equation could be the other? Infinitely many solutions are the same line. If you graph two equations that overlap, they have infinite solutions. So when looking at A through D, D is the only one where both parts of that equation are being multiplied by the same number 3, which means it's proportionately the same, making D the correct answer. For number 13, it says evaluate the equation. What is the value of negative 6 times x? For the sake of time, I already evaluated the equation. You can see the math there, leaving us with x equals 60. So when they say, what is the value of negative 6 times x, which is 60, they're looking for an answer of negative 360. There you go. And moving up to 14, says we have a system of equations there. It says if the solution to this system of equations is xy, what is the value of y? You would want to open up your Desmos graphing calculator on the exam, punch in each of those equations, which gives you a graph that looks like this. We can see those two lines cross at -2, -1, which is what I have written down right here, -2, -1. But they just want the value of y, so your answer there would only be -1. And number 15, Which of the following solutions would be the center of the circle and its radius for a circle graphed as that equation? Okay, there's a formula for that. I have it written down there below. For that formula, HK, I have those labeled there. Those are the center of the circle. And then that last number here, R squared, represents the radius. So looking at the equation they have given there, we notice because of the negatives, H is actually positive 10. So it could be C or D here. The K is there as well. And because of the R squared, we actually want a radius of 10 because 10 squared is 100. So my answer for that one is D, and we're done. Number 16 says, for the function f of x equals absolute value of 2x minus 6x, what value of c works for f of 3 minus the f of c equals negative 24? I would first start by simplifying the expression here to just the absolute value of negative 4x. And let's think about what are they looking for here. This is actually f of 3 would be negative 4 times 3 minus f of c equals negative 24. And this is going to be negative 12. The absolute value of negative 12 is just 12. So they're really saying 12 minus what would be negative 24. You do little calculations, and we know that this needs to say 36. Okay, 12 minus 36 is negative 24. So what they're really saying is f of c, okay, needs to be 36. Well, since it is actually negative 4 times something, okay, what do I times 4 by to get 36? It would have to be 9, right? The absolute value is positive 36. B would be our correct answer. Moving on to 17. It reads, when considering the exponential function f of x equals g of h to the power of x, which of the following equations in the same form does g show the value of f of 0? It's a mouthful there. Really, they're really paying attention to g, and they're saying when you plug in 0 for x, which of these has a g that will not change? That's what they're asking for there. So a, b, c, or d, when you plug in 0 for x, we're looking for one of those values to not change. Well, I notice here that when you raise anything to the power of 0, it really just becomes 1. Any number to the power of 0 is 1. So 1.25 to the power of 0 is 1, and that is going to give us an output of 15. Answer is B. Looking at 18, the number of views on a popular YouTube video a week after it was posted is represented by the function f of d equals 5,000 times 3 to the power of d over 15, where d is the number of days that have gone by. How many days will it take for the number of views to triple? Well, they're starting out here with 5,000, and the 3, if we just times it by 3, it's going to triple. So really they're saying at what value would this be to the power of 1? If we zoom in here, 15 over 15 would be 1. So it's that simple. B is your correct answer. Moving on. 19, we have a equation there, 3 fractions. It says the variables b, c, and d above are all positive integers and d is greater than c. Which expression would be the result of solving for b? So we want to isolate b. If c or d, think about it, if c or d were negative, then these would switch to positive. So that's why that little information about them being positive is being included. So I've rewritten the equation. I'm going to isolate b, so I have moved the negative 2 over c to the other side, making it positive. So let's keep working here. Um, First, I notice all the answer choices are using the number 4, and I have an 8 and two twos. And so I think it would be wise to first divide this by 2 so that it looks similar to their answers. So we actually have 4 over B equals 1 over C minus over D, starting to look better. Um, None of their answers have the fractions separated, so we actually want to combine that right side. We're going to use our rules of fractions, multiply both of those by D and both of these by C, so that we can combine the denominators there. And we're going to end up with D minus C in the numerator and a simple CD in the denominator. Okay. I don't want to multiply both sides by b here because that's going to create extra work. And so I'd like b to be in the numerator. And since these are two fractions um, equal to each other, we can actually flip. We're going to flip both of those over to their reciprocals. Okay, now this is starting to look a lot more manageable. My last step here to get b by itself is to multiply by 4. That goes over here in the numerator, and we have our answer here, which matches C. Moving on to 20. We got a graph here with temperature and time passed in hours. It says beginning at midnight, Julia recorded the outside temperature every hour for 8 hours. What was the average rate of change from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. in degrees Celsius per hour? This is 2 a.m. here. This is 6 a.m. there. And we'll notice that at 2 a.m., it was -3 degrees Celsius. And at 6 a.m., it was -9. So in 4 hours, okay, in 4 hours, and we actually want to put the y in the numerator there, it went down 6 degrees, -6 degrees Celsius. And we want to simplify this rate of change into, this would simplify to -1.5 degrees Celsius per hour. 21 says on Friday, a server made 17 more than 2 times what they made on Thursday's shift. The total made for both Thursday and Friday was $179. How much money did the server make on Thursday? These questions where, 17 more than 2 times, those type of things can be confusing to write down. So you have to stop and think about it. So let's think of Thursday as X and Friday as Y. In order for X and Y to be equal, okay, it says 17 more than 2 times what they made on Thursday shift. So I'd have to take $17 away from Friday and make it equal to 2 times what they made on Thursday. So I've written that part of the equation. The second equation's pretty simple. It's just Thursday's wages plus Fridays equals 179. And what I suggest once you have those is to go ahead and put those in Desmos and look at that. And you can check the answer, which in this case says 54 for X and 125 for Y. You can check those to see, if I times 54 by 2 and add $17 to it, does it equal 125? It does. So those two equations do work. Okay, so you could check yourself. If you made an error, maybe you added instead of subtracted 17, it would become evident when you look at your answer there. Okay, so how much money did the server make on Thursday? The answer there would have been 54. 22. A circle has points G and H on its circumference and point J in the center. I've drawn a picture there so you can visualize it on your test. You'd probably want to do that so you could do the same thing. It says the radius of the circle is 6 centimeters. So this and this here would be 6. If points GHJ make a triangle with a perimeter of 21, what is the length of line GH? So we're looking for this length, Okay. You're tempted there to maybe try to do the Pythagorean theorem or something like that, but we don't know if this is a right triangle. So, really, the perimeter is going to be just those three side lengths added together. So, if we go 21 minus 6 minus 6, we do get 9. So, A is your correct answer there. Looking at 23, a set of integers contains four consecutive even numbers. Okay, I've seen these problems before. I'm going to stop there. Let's think about this. Four consecutive even numbers. We're going to start with, x. That's the smallest integer. And then we're going to add 2 for the next one, then add 4, and then add 6. I've kind of laid that out there so you can see that. So when it says if the product of 4 in the third integer, okay, so my third integer there is x plus 4. I've kind of highlighted that there. We're going to say 4 times x plus 4 is greater than 58 more than the sum of the first and fourth. So you can see I've added the first and the fourth there. We're going to add 58 on there. Which inequality matches that? So I'm going to look at what I've written there, compare it to what is above, and it looks like D is the correct answer. Okay. The 58, they might have had that here instead of at the end. So you just have to be careful and read them accordingly. 24. This is probably one of the trickiest questions on this particular module. This says, so they like to replace actual numbers with variables and use the phrase constant. You'll see these types of things pop up quite a bit in those later parts of the test. This says the table above shows three different values of x with three corresponding values of y. The variable p represents a constant. Which linear equation represents the relationship between x and y? So we want to find the slope of this using the y minus y over x minus x, and we're just going to leave the variables in there, okay? So you can see I've done the 30 minus 22, which is 8, over x minus x, so p minus negative p, which would actually be 2p. And so this is going to simplify to actually 4 over p. That's my slope. Okay. And I look over on the left there, I do see some 4s in there with my p's. Now, there you could use the point slope formula to try to plug this in. I think there's an easier way on this particular problem. I noticed that when it went from negative p to p, I'm going to write it in there. They skipped a 0. Okay. So it went plus p, then plus p again, and then plus p again. Okay. And so if we look at the over here in the y, we'll notice that it went basically plus 4. So this should say 26 plus 4 and then plus 4. So my y-intercept there is 0, 26. So if I want to say y equals mx plus b, okay, then I'm going to say y equals slope 4 over p, and then I still have an x there, plus the y-intercept, which is 26. Okay. And we'll notice that's starting to look a lot more like my options. Now, I want this in standard form. Okay. So I'm going to move the x. So I'm going to subtract. I want to get rid of that denominator. Okay. So if I were to multiply everything by p, okay, so if I multiply this whole thing by p, it's going to rule out that divided by p. Okay. So I'm going to have py equals 4x plus 26p. And notice that their answers are all in standard form with x on the left side. So if I move the x over here, I get negative 4x, okay, plus py equals 26 P. We notice that my answer is A. Okay. Those types of problems, again, when they're using constants instead of numbers, the answer choices there look very confusing. But you notice once you follow your steps of finding slope using y equals mx plus b, it's actually not too bad. All right, throwing a little trig in there on the next one. It says analyze this expression. We have the cosine of 54 times the sine of 36 plus the sine of 54 times the cosine of 36. Okay, which of the following expressions would be the equivalent. Okay. Without knowing anything about trig, you could actually just put cosine of 54 into a calculator to get 0.587. It's an irrational number. And then you'll notice that when you punch in the sine of 36, you actually get the exact same value. Same thing with the other side. You get 0.809 and a whole bunch of numbers. And so you get the same thing. So you'll notice each of those is actually the same value. Okay. And so when I look at my answer choices, I'm definitely going to have a squared in here somewhere and not times two. Okay. So I'm looking at C or D. And now notice that to make it a little trickier, they've actually they've used this one first to say sine of 54 squared. So it could be C or D. And then they've actually used the sine of 36 squared, which would be D as my final answer. Now, if you want a little review of how sine, cosine, tangent works, just remember that it has to be a right triangle. Looking over at this diagram, I did kind of draw remember that the sine is equal to opposite over hypotenuse, and cosine is actually adjacent over hypotenuse. Because of how that's set up, okay, if you use 36 degrees, then you're looking at opposite over hypotenuse. But if you use the 54 degrees angle, you're actually looking at adjacent over hypotenuse. So you'll notice those are actually going to be the exact same ratio, therefore the exact same value. That is why that works out like that in your calculator. 26 says the cost of renting a gaming console is $42 for the first day, and then it costs $30 a day for every day after, which function shows the total cost C for the number of days the console is rented. Upon reading that, you're very tempted to click B there because you have $30 a day plus $42 for the first day. But note that on the first day, it's really just $30 plus an additional 12 to get to that 42 total. And so the answer is actually D. Be careful with your answer choices and not being tricked there. And last but not least, for the following function, at what value of x does g of x reach its minimum? This is a quadratic, so you're going to have a parabola, and basically we're wondering at what point this would be the minimum, okay? And so that's going to have an x value and a y value. I would punch that into Desmos, and let's see what we have. On entering it, I have my graph there. I'm going to just zoom in on there and notice that I have two values. The x value is actually what would I want to type in? Not the whole coordinate, but actually I would just want to say x equals 4, negative 4.5. That is the completion of Module 1. Thanks for hanging around, and I will be posting Module 2 very soon, and you can go through that for more practice for your SAT.